What is up, fellas? So I want to do a video on changing the bearings in my wheels. So these are the wheels off of my 350. I don't ride this bike as much as I used to, but I would like to do some dual sporting on it. And so I went to add some weights to the wheels to balance them out. And while doing that, as usual, I took a look at my bearings, and lo and behold, they're trash. Like, I cannot, no matter what I do, I can't turn them by hand. And if I turn them with the axle, you can feel almost like the balls are crushed, right? The bummer is these bearings have about 15 hours on them, like 1.5. And these are all balls bearings. And I've read that all balls, could be good, could be bad. I decided to roll the dice, and unfortunately not worth the money. So I'm going to be replacing these all balls bearings with KTM OEM, which can go for 100 hours, if not more, in my experience. The front one is still okay, but I'm going to replace it just anyway, since I don't trust this brand anymore. So anyway, the tools for the job, for those who haven't done it, it's really not difficult if you have the right tools. If you don't have the right tools, it can turn into a bit of a nightmare. First thing I have is a seal puller. So to pull this seal here around, right? You can do it with a screwdriver, but again, you're going to be gouging things, and this works a lot better. These are all Tusk brand because I use them, I've used them about 3 times so far, so I'm not going to invest too much. These are actual bearing seal, what do they call it? The Tusk bearing race and seal driver kit. So they come in different sizes, so you can kind of see, you can easily push something down with these without damaging it, right? Which is kind of nice. So got that. And then we got the bearing puller kit, also Tusk brand. This expands inside the bearing, kind of on the edge of it. And then you use the hammer to hammer the bearing out, which makes the life a lot easier than having to pound the bearing out from the other side, especially when you don't necessarily have the room to do so in the wheel. So we're gonna be using these tools to make our life easy. Like I said, I've done this twice before, so I'm not an expert by any means, but I'll kind of walk you guys through as I'm doing it. Okay, so step 1 is to pull this seal. So it's really, I don't know if there's a right way to do this, but that's how I do it. There's still grease in here, so I don't think too much water got in, so I don't know what happened. I think the bearing literally crushed, which is very, very disappointing. So we're gonna do that on both sides here. By the way, I'm using the Tusk wheel stand, which works pretty good for my purposes. It's a little wobbly. I know you can nail it down to the floor, but I've been changing my tires and bearings on this thing for a while, and it's been fine. You can kind of tell this one's got more garbage in it. I also, these seals that came with the all balls weren't that good, and also the bearings themselves are super tight. So when you put the spacer in, you got to pound it in and pound it out, which I wasn't a big fan of either. So all in all balls. I think the name implies just all balls. Okay, so worth noting, one side has a retainer ring, the other side does not. So I'm looking here. Yeah, there's a retainer ring here. So you're gonna wanna get that, it's a, what's it, C-clip, I guess to call it, or, yeah, anyway, it's a ring that's holding this bearing in. The other side doesn't have that. But don't try to pound this bearing out without removing this ring, because you're not gonna get very far, and you're probably gonna damage the wheel. Okay, so I'm gonna try to get this out on camera. What could possibly go wrong, right? You gotta watch your eyes with this thing. It needs to come out of the grooves all around, obviously. There he goes. Almost lost it. So this is what it looks like. I probably should be wearing gloves. It's got the 2 holes obviously here. Don't try doing this with anything else than proper pliers. I mean, these are pretty cheap on Amazon. I was gonna invest some better ones, but honestly, these do fine. So once you get this out, like I said, the other side doesn't have it. Basically, at this point, you're ready to start pounding this bearing out. Okay, so we need to get the correct size extractor in. So this one is currently loose, right? And you can tell just barely fits in there. But when there was an audible click, I don't know if you heard that, but now it's sort of, you can feel it pulling against the kind of inner edge of the bearing. You can still pull it out, but you essentially want to get this edge, it's got like a raised edge, between the spacer that's in the wheel and the bearing. It doesn't look like there's much space, but it does actually work. So there we go. So but what I basically do by hand, kind of get it up on the edge, put a little pressure on it, and then start twisting this apart. So it's a little bit in there. Okay, so now it's kind of holding on its own, but this is clearly not enough. So you need to actually tighten this pretty good, because you want to expand this. Not, you know, don't damage anything, but you can kind of feel, there we go. That should do it. I've had these pop out before, so we'll see. Might take a few tries. Ideally, this is going to hold. So now we get this, I guess it's called a slide hammer, right? You're probably not going to see me hammering this too much on camera because I'm too close, but let's see what happens here. This might be really loud, so if you're using headphones, I'll try to lower the volume. Here we go. It's starting to go. I don't know if you can tell, but it's definitely moving. There we go. Bearing came out. So this works super well. Like I said, it's not a very expensive kit. I mean, I know there are other options out there. I've had pretty good luck with Tusk, and I like supporting Rocky Mountain because of everything they do for the community. So you got to loosen this. There we go. And then this should just come off. And it sure did. Should have done this earlier, but so this is the all balls bearing. Yeah, you can definitely tell there's something not quite right with it. And then you can pull the spacer out. Unlike me, try not to get any grease on your brake rotor. That would be the smarter thing to do. So you can get the KTM bearing kit that comes with the spacer, it comes with the actual side spacers too, and it comes with a new clip. Unless this is like horribly corroded or something, I'm not sure why you would need all that. I've done it before and it's not worth the money. So you can just order the bearings from the OEM catalog and be good to go. So we save this and we'll do the same thing on the other side now. Okay, so we flip the wheel. And like I said, you can double check, but as far as I remember, the other side does not have that C-clip looking retainer. Yeah, the bearing is just clearly visible there. So I'm not sure why they only have it on one side, to be honest with you. If someone knows, feel free to tell me in the comments. But this should come out hopefully as easily as the other one. So again, we put this in by hand. Okay, so again, this one has a more room now because I took the spacer out. So you can kind of tell when it's on the edge. You can actually twist this apart a little more. Get it nicely in there. So you got to hold it up now because there's no spacer to hold it up. And just tighten it enough to expand in the bearing. There we go. Now it's nice and tight in there. And we slide the hammer in. Want to make sure you get this thing. That was almost my finger. You want to make sure you get this thing threaded in all the way because you're applying a lot of pounding force here. You don't want to strip anything. There we go. So we'll pound this one out and see what happens. It's starting to come out. And there we go. This one came out really easily too. What we're gonna do is we're gonna get this off, we're gonna get this hub cleaned up, and I'll kind of show you what's inside of it. Okay, so the wheel has this black spacer inside here. you can remove this if it's damaged and replace it. Mine looks fine. So the bearing on this side rests against this side. Then on the other side is where the spacer rests. And then the other bearing sandwiches the spacer basically between this bearing and the other one, obviously. So what I like to do is first, I mean, this is already greased up because, you know, there's not that many hours on this wheel for this new bearing that I had, but still going to put a little grease on the inside to help the bearing get in there. Doesn't need to be a ton, just enough to let it slide easier. There we go. This is the OEM KTM bearing. So yeah, you can, nice and smooth. Not too easy to move, but obviously will break in a little bit. So kind of the nice thing about these is they do kind of sit in there just a tiny bit. So you don't have to fight with getting it in that hole initially, right? But now here's what I use. So this is the bearing driver kit I told you about. So this one is the perfect size. Well, it's a little small, but it's actually just good enough to get this in once it's inside. I don't like kind of fiddling with a smaller one when the bearing is still out though. So at first I drive it with a slightly bigger one to make sure I don't, you know, damage anything and that I'm definitely hitting the outside, not because you don't want to be hitting the inside here, right? If you smack the inside here, you're damaging the balls. You want to be hitting the outside, right? So this covers it nicely, right? So this just assembles like this. And you kind of want to make sure that you try to hit this evenly here so that it goes in straight. You don't want to go at an angle. So you can tell it's going in. I had this changed sound because I bottomed out on the outside of the wheel. So here's where we're going to switch to our smaller, I don't know what to call this, thing. The professional name is thing. Nope, that's the wrong size. Yeah, so you can tell obviously there, this one's much smaller, right? So this will go in. And now here you want to make sure you center this. You know, this is smaller than the bearing, but it does catch enough of the outside to push this in correctly. So you just kind of want to eyeball it, make sure it's all around even, and kind of slowly tap it in until it gets inside the wheel. And keep it centered when you're doing this. Yeah, change sound. You can kind of put your finger in there, make sure it's touching that plastic. It is, the plastic spacer. I'm gonna do the other side before I do the seal, just so that way, you know, if I need to change anything, I'm not gonna be removing the seal again. The seal is the very last thing to go in. Okay, so on this side, there's still a little bit of lube left in there, but we're gonna go ahead and lube it up some more anyway. And I'm just using Amsoil synthetic water resistant grease. This stuff has been working pretty good for me. Let's just get that nicely lubed up. There we go. Don't forget to wipe your hands on your pants. In my case, I'm gonna be an adult and wipe it in a rag, okay? So these bearings come individually packaged, but like I said, if you go to the KTM OEM catalog, on like Rocky Mountain ATV, you can order these individually. So just make sure it's still, yep, that's a good one. Okay, so we place this one in there. Same deal. We're gonna start with the bigger. I'm sure there are other ways of doing this. This is how I do it. And it works pretty good for the most part. Once in a while, I'll drive the bearing in a little crooked at first. So you gotta kind of pound it back out, which I don't like doing because that means you're stressing a new bearing by, you know, pounding it out with the pressure on the inside, but kind of is what it is. So never hurts to say a little prayer, make sure everything's gonna go well. You know what? We just caught ourselves almost making a mistake. Guess what I forgot to do? I forgot to put the spacer in. So this is a vital piece that you shouldn't forget to do. So yeah, I do that for educational purposes to show you guys how easily it is to make a very bad mistake. So this has to go in between the two bearings, obviously. Now the trick is, when you drop it in, it kind of centers itself nicely for the most part on one end. There we go. You push it into that plastic retainer on the other side so it stands up. As you're pounding this in, make sure it stays centered every so often. Help it along if it's not, because you don't want to get this seated with that not fully seated on the other end. And also you want to make sure it lines up with the axle. Some of these spacers will move inside between the bearings. Mine usually do not. They're pretty tight, so I want to make sure they stay centered when the bearing gets fully seated. All right, so now that we got the spacer in there, we're going to try this again. And that one went a little crooked, but it evened itself out. This wobbles, so it's not giving it sort of I'm putting my finger pressure on it here. But that's seated in there pretty good so far. So now we got to swap sides, and I'm still keeping an eye on the spacer, making sure it's still seated, and it is. You can also run your axle through it to help it seat if it's not. And again, position it kind of nicely in the center. Try not to touch your brake rotor with your greasy hands if you can, and get this guy in there. And I'm looking to make sure, because I heard it seat, yeah, my spacer is nice and even with the edges, so that looks good. All right, that sound isn't changing, so I think it's good. I can also see the groove that the ring is going to go into above the bearing now, so I think the depth is good. So we need to get that ring back in. Okay, so we got our ring here. I recommend you wear some goggles or glasses, whatever, to do this part, because these can fly, and you don't want it flying into your eye by any means. So get it in there. I got one side in. There we go, both sides in. You want to make sure you can see it seated all the way around, which it is. So there we go. Okay, so now it's time to drive in the seals on the side. The seal just looks like this. I'm sure you've seen them before. Similar seals are used for various engine related bearing crank places, right? So it's just got a rubber piece on the inside, and then it's got that brass, aluminum, something on the outside, probably aluminum, maybe steel, I don't know. Anyway, I do try to lube this up a little bit. It actually has grease on it, and I think the purpose is to keep stuff out of this area, but I like to put a little bit of grease in there because that way the grease sort of captures anything that may get in there. And also I just feel better about this. I kind of like to grease everything. Okay, so we have this positioned just like this. Again, it kind of falls in there a little bit, which is good. I'm going to use my bigger surface to get this guy in. This is a pretty soft metal, so it'll go in really easily, so don't just hammer the hell out of it. Nice, easy taps. And you can hear it change sound. And you just want to kind of make sure that it's even with the surface, which it is for me here. So I'm happy with how that looks. So we'll flip the wheel and we'll do the same on the other side. Okay, so we're on the other side. I'm gonna, once again, loop this up a little bit all in here, including the bearing face. Probably not necessary, but as I said, makes me feel a little bit better about life. Again, get it in there nice and even. This one's sitting a little crooked, but I think it'll be okay. Start pounding it in. It's going a little crooked here, but because this is a pretty big surface, it'll catch up. Sound changed again. and it's in there, and it feels pretty good. So yeah, so that's the bearing job, and I can now move my bearings with my fingers, as I should be able to. The front is essentially the same. If I recall correctly, the front does not have that retaining clip. I could be wrong about that, but if you follow the similar steps, you should be able to do the front just as easily. Of course, the front bearings are a different size, so make sure you order the right part numbers for the front and the rear wheel. So yeah, this is how I do it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Otherwise, thank you for watching.